Hey guys, tonight we're travelling back to a time so chaotic that even your most disorganised relative would raise an eyebrow. The world before clocks. A time when people told time by the position of the sun, the crowing of roosters, or if that one guy in the village suddenly decided it was happy hour o'clock. Forget about time zones, daylight savings, and Apple Watches that remind you when to pee. This is pure chaotic time management, brought to you by the very human ability to completely ignore the passage of time. So before you get too cozy, take a moment to like this video and subscribe, but only if you really enjoy what I do here. I promise not to use it against you, unless you dislike this journey through temporal absurdity. And of course, leave a comment letting me know where you're tuning in from and if you're a morning person or a night owl. It's always fascinating to see how time zones had absolutely no meaning back then. Now, dim those lights, put on a fan for that delightful background ambience and make yourself comfortable. Let's think together. Ever wished you could just wake up and have no responsibilities to an alarm clock? Ever considered what it was like to plan your day by following shadows and sipping herbal tea while staring at the sun? What would life be like if we took a cue from squirrels and just winged it? And now, congratulations, you've just woken up in the 13th century, where clocks are fancy wooden contraptions found only in the nobility's castles, if they even exist at all. Spoiler alert, they don't. Your first task? Try to figure out what time it is without losing your mind. Imagine waking up with the sun peeking through a thatched roof, signifying a brand new day, and also the cause of yet another regrettable sunburn. You've never met a rooster you liked, but it's a tumultuous love-hate relationship, as their crowing does serve a purpose. The obligation to start the day. That's right, no light-up clocks, no app reminders, just you, a rooster, and a deep existential crisis over whether you're too tired to face the day. But here's the kicker, you're not even properly awake yet. You hear not just one rooster crow, but a chorus of them, each one competing to assert its dominance in the neighbourhood. It's like a feathered version of American Idol, and you're this sleepy Simon Cowell stuck in a heap of straw. As you lie in your narrow bed, pondering whether hitting snooze is viable when your alarm is an insistent bird, the sun flirts with the horizon like a shy suitor. The sunlight creeps in, slowly warming your face and making it hard to deny that the day is, unfortunately, here to stay. Stumbling out of bed is a performance art that could rival interpretive dance. You navigate a veritable minefield of discarded straw, sleeping livestock, and a few unfortunate mud puddles from last night's rain. Your bare feet touch the ground, and instantly seek refuge in the depths of your poor life choices. A sensation akin to stepping on a Lego for those poor souls cursed with childhood trauma. Why do you refuse to get your feet covered? Because the shoes are a luxury of the wealthy, and dear friend, that status means you'll be sticking it out with nothing but a wild sense of adventure for footwear. Now, let's chat about breakfast. The aroma of hay mingling with the faintest whiff of yesterday's goat stew isn't quite the savoury wake-up call you envisioned, is it? Instead, you stand there, fighting time and your digestive instincts while preparing to consume what can only be described as gruel with aspirations. Breakfast in the medieval world resembles a convoluted puzzle that you somehow have to assemble with whatever scraps are lying around, as if everyday food decisions were yet another riddle meant to keep you on your toes. You daydream about sizzling bacon and fresh bread, while the reality settling in is a lukewarm bowl of something that used to resemble soup. Or maybe it was just last week's porridge reimagined as an avant-garde dish. Who can say? The crow of the rooster isn't just an alarm, it's the herald of duties lingering over your head like a sword of Damocles. You've got crops to tend, animals to feed, and a laundry list of tasks that would easily crush the most seasoned project managers. After breakfast, time becomes a blurry illusion. You're out there in the fields, tilling the soil or chasing runaway chickens like they've taken an oath to disrupt your life's work. Every fleeting moment feels like a disastrous race against time, and yet the sun is merely shifting in the sky, with all the grace of a lazy cat that refuses to acknowledge your mounting panic. When it comes to evening hours, as they say, the sun sets, but not your restlessness. The gradual dimming of daylight brings an entirely new challenge. When will people learn to curtail enthusiasm during the shift from dusk to dawn? Fumbly guesswork kicks in again. Time spent wandering aimlessly toward finishing tasks, only to catch a glimpse of the sun sinking down too quickly. Where did the hours go? Perhaps the sand in the hourglass stole them right under your nose, or better yet, maybe the shadows consumed them, laughing at your befuddlement as you realise you didn't harvest half of what you intended, and actually forgot to milk the cow again. But just as the stars appear to take their place in the sky, marking the end of the day's responsibilities, the roosters are still there too, positioned, loud, and undeniably judgmental. By now, you either love or resent the audacity of far too many vocal fowl for your taste. After all, that charming sound doesn't always feel so charming when they decide 3 a.m. is an excellent time for karaoke practice. You think to yourself, how did people survive this nightly onslaught and manage their own sanity? Must have been simpler times, my friends, or at least different. So, as you finally slump into bed, covered in dirt and a newfound appreciation for your rustic existence, you contemplate tomorrow's awakening with all its chaos and simplicity. Tomorrow, the danger of the rooster's crow waits, a daily reminder that while time is fleeting, the morning wait is interminable. The only certainty. You'll have a new day filled with the same old nonsense, and once again, the roosters will be keeping an eye on you. Time management back then was like a toddler with a pack of crayons, deranged yet strangely beautiful. Hourglasses of varying sizes would grace the tables of the wealthy, letting sand trickle down at the rate of your hopes and dreams. You could flip one over to mark a task, but if you forgot about it and the sand ran out, surprise, you just wasted your afternoon on meaningful conversations with your neighbour's goat. And did those hourglasses have fancy names? Of course. You'd have your charmingly portable mini hourglass for timing your egg, while the grander versions, the blustering hour, loomed large like granite sculptures. Who needs clocks when you can just shake a little glass tube and wait for time to cream soda its way to a halt? Imagine the process of setting one of these beauties up. You'd set a lively hourglass on the table, puffing your chest out like you were about to announce that the king himself was visiting. I shall now time my bread baking with this glorious creation, you'd declare, as friends and family nod in admiration, perhaps a little too enthusiastically given it's just sand and glass. And then you'd flip the hourglass, watching that sweet granulated beauty cascade downwards as if in slow motion, only to forget about it while fabricating a story about how the last 3 potatoes were abducted by the neighbour's suspicious raccoon. Of course, with hourglasses, timing was subjective, as much a matter of perspective as the discussion that seemed to linger longer than the significance of life's mundanities. Picture discontent bakers wondering how long this whole process really should take when they couldn't tell if 10 minutes had passed or 10 seconds, because their hourglass had been flipped over its precipice at a particularly enthusiastic dinner party, and now all attention had shifted back to the goat. "Is that your goat again?" you'd hear murmured. "It sounds like it wants to dance." The truth was, if you were lucky enough to own an hourglass, you wore it like a badge of honour. Friends would come knocking, not only hoping to enjoy your hospitality, but also experiencing a piece of high society just by participating in the whimsy of endless timing misadventures. And let's not forget the not-so-wealthy peasants who relied on their trusty sundials instead. "Time," they would simply say, "let the sun do the talking," with a shrug and maybe a handful of squawking chickens to accompany their joy. But trying to gauge the right time for anything when you only had a sundial was a puzzle in itself. Sure, it worked most of the time, provided there were no clouds, and incredibly reliable if you didn't have a neighbour who fancied himself a cloud sorcerer. "A cloud for the moon, is it? How delightful," they would proclaim while casting shade on the practicality of others. Now, let's talk about the trials of multitasking. Suppose you were cooking with that hourglass ticking down and Mom comes yelling for you to fetch water from the well because she can't quite reach it. Seconds are of the essence, at least they ought to be, but you're just minutes away from your bread hitting perfection, or despairing back into raw dough, and someone's goat has wandered in formation like it's starring in the medieval version of Chariots of Fire. Managed well, hourglasses underscore the delicate art of cooking, the nuanced nature of household bigwigs, and the ongoing melodrama of village life. Would the bread rise? Would dinner await? Would you be left discussing the virtue of goat puns rather than baking? Once the hourglass flipped, you could only hope that you'd completed half your chores while half the town observed your hourglass prowess. As sunset or sunrise arrived with the fury of mild inconvenience, no gauge to predict it, many loitered around the hourglass, each grain of sand morphing into conversations about the unpredictability of life. The quickening of the grain became an endless dance. The hourglass is spinning, the quarrel over goats and imaginary squabbles growing louder, while time plodded ahead through the giddiness of uncounted hours. Ultimately, the hourglass encapsulated not just the sand of time but the paradox of existence, which stretched between anxiety and satisfaction. So, should you have had the fortune of another errant hourglass slip through your fingers, you'd know perfectly well that while time might guide you, it's the company you keep, the goats, the neighbours, the never-ending stories, that fills those hours with a beauty that no clock ever could. The Seasonal Calendar, Farming Edition. The seasons ruled the lives of our ancestors more than any corporate calendar ever could. You didn't book appointments, you scheduled your life via sowing and reaping, planting crops during the vernal equinox, a must, trying to figure out when to harvest strawberries. Well, I pray the frost doesn't arrive before you've had your fill, or you're looking at a sad pie made from dirt and regret. Each season passed like a dramatic performance, with spring leading the way as an ambitious lead actor determined to showcase its dazzling array of blooms and abundant growth. Spring heralded the revival of potential, as people dug into the earth with a fervour normally reserved for the final day of dieting. Eager hands churned through mud as if it were precious gold. The smell of moist soil danced nauseously in the air, mixed with a suspiciously fragrant hint of, well, last year's sad leftovers. Ever tried to retrieve some rogue potatoes only to find them transforming into a science experiment? You might just discover the origin of modern-day horror stories before lunch is even served. Planting season meant one thing: survive the mud, curse the sky, and pray the livestock didn't wander off to test the local farmer's patience. By the time summer rolled in like a proud, sunburnted parade float, the real sweat and uncertainty began. Crops blossomed, weeds flourished, and tiny pests declared an unholy war on your masterpiece garden, leaving you to examine leaf damage while swearing vengeance. You might as well get used to trying to swat at them with the nearest makeshift weapon you can find. Insect repellents had not been invented. Instead, you'll be armed with the moral fortitude of a dedicated grandparent, muttering about how this would all be worth it in the end. Back when clocks ceased to exist, time was measured by the mundane rhythms of life. A whispered thrill would fill the air the morning after a good rain, the kind that wasn't just promising but absolutely strutting down the lane like it owned the village. The process of weeding your crops became akin to a monastic ritual, as you meticulously plucked out every irritating weed, only to have your 5-year-old offspring reintroduce them moments later as they gleefully performed their best pirouette in your carefully cultivated haven. Ah, summer evenings, when the days stretched into a festival of natural phenomena, as you soaked in the rich warmth of the golden hour, the shadowy dance of sunlight became your pseudo-clockwork. Thinking about dinner? Well, pray the chickens don't wander off, and hope the cat doesn't get overly ambitious with the local rodent population while you're distracted. With no deep fryer to test the results, dinner depended heavily on the whims of nature. An attempt at making flatbread would conjure forth visions of smoky fires, ash-coated fingers, and those unfortunate moments when the cat sat at the table as if it were a king accepting tributes. As summer laid its lavish bounty across the land, everyone anxiously awaited the harvest season. Pumpkins and squash grinned at you from their beds. I don't know who decided those were designs by nature's own graphic artist, but the results were striking. The question remained, could you trust your judgment to harvest before it became too late? Those pumpkins will inevitably turn into an unwanted family drama. Debating who truly planted them initially becomes less of a harvest celebration and more of a game of hot potato. You're catching nothing but grief. But then autumn arrives with its golden leaves fluttering through the air, helping you pretend that maintaining a farm had been worthwhile. Every gust of wind brought potent aromas of decay and impending frost. Savouring the scent of drying corn was like living in an ongoing Instagram filter, regardless of how quickly the season passed. With a little recognition of time's passing, you'd keenly await the first frost, poised to seal the fate of your remaining crops like a heavy door slamming shut on a reunion gone awry. By winter, the toil and uncertainty of your crops became history's frail reminder that while seasons ruled your life, mistakes still might become the hallmark of experience. You delighted in bonfire nights filled with stories of brave harvesters and terrifying frost creatures while trying to forget the bitter taste of last year's pie made from raw potatoes. And maybe, just maybe, resolve to do better, until the next spring's dance of planting temptation threw all previous wisdom out the window. Who knows? At least now the only clock you worry about is the one whose hands are elegantly drawn in quirky animal motifs. Time is more a suggestion than a requirement anyway. Take a large stone slab, stick a stick in the middle and watch the sun cast shadows. Voila, you've built a sundial, though you might want to take notes as the shadows shift less predictably than your Uncle Bob after a few too many pints. One glance could leave you thinking it's midday when it's just definitely not. The great invention of the sundial promised to keep track of time like a nobleman's pocket watch, albeit with a slightly more rustic charm, if you consider hefty stones and shadows dramatic. To the untrained eye, the sundial was less a beacon of accuracy and more a giant, ancient version of a game of charades, where the answers were likely hysterically inaccurate. Imagine waking up in a bustling village, rubbing the sleep from your eyes, only to find that there's a very large gnomon, that's the fancy word for the stick, poking out of the ground. What do? Do you sprint towards it, desperate to align your day with the sun? Or do you squint at it, trying to determine if you should start planting crops or simply return to bed until it's definitely lunchtime? Trust me, in a world without precise measurements, the enthusiasm of the sun is both beguiling and confusing. Let's not even get started on cloudy days. What happens when that cheeky sun decides to play hide and seek? Do you wait it out, tapping your foot anxiously while humming the Waiting for Godot theme in your head? Or do you resort to ancient guessing games, labouring under the assumption that it must be around noonish? Talk about a time-keeping nightmare. Days spent scratching your head, looking up at the sky, and cursing that one cloud that keeps ruining your carefully planned harvest schedule. Another twist in the tale involves the sundial's demand for your full attention. Otherwise, it becomes a glorified stone lawn ornament. One forgot to adjust for the seasonal shifts, something akin to celebrating a birthday 6 months early. Yes, it's lovely to measure solstices with your gnomon. Still, the catch. Daylight savings time was likely entirely invented around the fact that someone forgot to move the sundial forward in spring and ended up surprised when the crops began sprouting overnight. Farmers might have been throwing shade at the sundial while searching for their forks. However, despite its flaws, the sundial held a unique charm. Diligent sun seekers could gather around it in the village centre, make observations, and proceed to brag about how they were the Time Lords of their comically small realm. That's right, my friends, it is precisely chillies this much past bedtime. They'd bicker over whether it was wiser to plant beans or wait until after full sunlight, pointing out various angles that the sun might prefer, as if the sun were a fickle deity known to take offence over unseasonable crops. And let's not overlook the actual construction and maintenance of these older timers. You'd need not only a sturdy slab and a perfectly aligned stick, but a team of skilled craftsmen who could endure endless debates about surface angles. A polite way of saying, who's going to be the first to fall asleep while measuring? Imagine a whole guild devoted to making sure that stick was just the right height and calibre, like an artisanal gnomon workshop, complete with buy 2 sundials, get a third half off deals. Of course, let's not be too hasty in bundling the sundial's drawbacks alongside its artistic beauty. It's still remarkably ingenious, especially when one considers the other mechanisms of measuring time that were trending, or, by now, maybe a decade out of fashion. Water clocks. They may float innovation forward, but offered a fair share of their own dramas. Sand timers? Well, they could measure time for exactly as long as the grains of sand cooperated. Now, a sundial? It's a lovely piece of your rural aesthetic. Sure, it wobbles with shadows, but it draws a crowd too. Villagers could gather around, breathing in summer air full of light, and gossip about how cricket chirps could somehow predict the weather while indirectly getting the time wrong. They'd throw shade at everyone who ever dared to run late using a sundial, all while peeking at their freshly planted beans, excitedly murmuring, perhaps the sun truly controls their life. Ah, the sundial. Ancient, beautiful, poetically impractical, yet somehow still the most magnetic draw to the village square. What could be better? If roosters were the morning alarm, church bells were the cannon volleys of time. Whether you were ready or not, the call to prayer would ring out, reminding you that you were late for, well, whatever it is the church was doing. And if you missed the last one, good luck with that. You'd better pray your neighbour wasn't saving you a seat. In a world ruled by the ticking and often clanging of the bells, punctuality was less about the clock and more about your ability to hear the rumble of dispiriting chimes echoing through town. Imagine you're a peasant, groggy and yawning, when suddenly the church bell tolls like a giant alarm clock you can't ignore. Startled awake, you throw back your straw blanket and glance around your one-room hut, now infused with a kind of pandemonium as family members clamour to get moving. You leap out of bed, your feet colliding with the chilly earthen floor as you scramble to find your woolen tunic, all the while praying that the bell's booming voice isn't a sign that Mass begins in 2 hours. The last thing you need is to miss another sermon and face the pointed finger of judgment from Sister Agnes. The church didn't just regulate your weekly prayers, it dictated your life. Work a little too late in the fields? You'd hear about it from the priest, likely while you tried to wrestle an explanation out of your cow about why it decided to lie down for some spontaneous napping instead of providing milk. Your life revolved around those bells, which rang again and again throughout the day like a diligent mother shouting reminders at her children. They clanged for matins, for noon prayer, and even for evening vespers. If you were lucky, you'd get a break in between some of those chimes and have time to, heaven forbid, grab a snack of stale bread while contemplating your existence. Life choices sometimes don't come with eye-opening clarity, particularly when you're constantly dodging relentless church schedules. Did I hear a bell? You might ask your neighbours, who it turns out are just as unreliable with time as you are. Their response could range from an enthusiastic, "Yes, let's go," to "Nah, I think that one just fell off the wall again." Everyone thrived on half-hearted enthusiasm, all while frantically rushing to throw on whatever clothing hadn't turned into a breeding ground for lice this week. You might as well have received a gold star for successfully navigating the severity of church discipline regarding lateness. After all, missing a service wasn't just considered bad manners, it was practically a war against salvation. And thanks to the bells, missing Mass meant more than the social shunning from your friends and family, who were always keen to quiz you on the sermon's details later. It also risked a stern reprimanding from the church itself. Picture the scene. You stroll into Mass 10 minutes behind schedule, and suddenly every head turns your way like a scene from a remorse-filled opera. Silence falls, except for the sound of the bell ringing in what could only be described as a divine form of shaming. If you were part of the noble class, however, the bells played a rather different role. For them, those tolls meant nothing more than a fashionable accessory to their courtyard drama, like the latest gossip, or that surprisingly vibrant silk scarf they just had to show off. "Oh, darling, you were late to dinner? I simply couldn't hear the bells over the sound of my own superiority," they'd chirp, looking down their noses at you as you struggled with your muddy boots. Because inevitably your task at hand was never just about being on time. It was a battle against your very being as a lowly peasant caught up in a world that somehow still measured time, just by a different standard entirely. Yet in the end, the church bells became a kind of symphony of life, orchestrating chaos while also marking the inevitable passage of time. As you filed into the church, dodging a few patched-up tunics along the way, while adjusting to the dim light inside, you didn't just brood over a missed appointment. Rather, you pondered the countless traditions, promises, and mysteries intertwined with every reverberation. Whether the bells were ringing in your favour or reminding you of another late entry into the holy book of timekeeping, they held a sort of exquisite power. While you hardly had much control over your calendar, those ear-piercing chimes became the soundtrack of existence, enduring like an old friend you couldn't quite shake. And so life continued, with each clang of the bell prompting you not just to hurry, but to reflect on the deep absurdity of it all. Because really, what's the point of being punctual when everyone else is as lost in the passage of time? A charming chaos-filled comedy enacted in a dim room, light flickering with anticipation, and the bell still echoing through the mismatched timepieces of a world that had forgotten what a clock truly was. In a world where time was synonymous with survival, the feast days arrived like a ticking clock of joy that came with just a hint of agony. Goodbye, hard work. Hello, gluttony. But once the feast was over, how to manage the remainder of the sparse year? Probably just counting the number of dry potatoes in the larder like a really sad counting game. The anticipation of feast days was akin to waiting for a pizza delivery. Everyone was buzzing with excitement, but deep down someone knew things were going to get messy, and it was probably you as well as your stomach. Imagine the scene. A wooden table laden with all the delicacies your imagination could concoct if it had been endlessly starving for something other than boiled turnips for the better part of 6 months. Roasted meats, bright fruits, and some slightly questionable alcohol. Well, let's be honest, it was probably beer that was less about flavour and more about survival. But while you feast, somewhere just outside your hut, the eerie sounds of silence wrapped around dry fields as you wondered when, if ever, a crop would grow again. Quite the paradox, right? You gathered with friends, revelling in the moment, knowing full well the glorious banquet would soon morph into a tragic comic reel of hunger pangs. In the lead up to the feast, your thoughts were far more wishful than they ought to be. You could have swore you'd just heard the neighbour's goat muttering something about the best laid plans. Maybe this year will be different, you shouted into the abyss of living misery, clutching your corn cob and dreaming about a time when food would be as abundant as your regrets about that last potato. Of course, no one could forget the endless tasks leading up to the festival. Grinding wheat or corn into flour was usually a full-body workout, but hey, every grain counted. The sweet reward of feasting was just around the corner. As the big day approached, conversations buzzed about how to stretch the meal into plagiarism-worthy greatness. What can we put on the table this year that'll make our neighbours cry with the envy? It was a test of creativity on par with a modern-day cooking show, but without the fancy apparatuses or online recipe blogs. The ingredients could include anything that wouldn't immediately kill you. Some slightly wilted carrots, a handful of mystery roots, and if you were lucky, a few foraged mushrooms that didn't scream at you on sight. As the sun rose on the big day, you awoke with visions of pipe dreams and aromas resembling optimism. Celebrations kicked off with loud proclamations thanks to the resident priest, reminding you all of just how blessed you were, of these utterly irreplaceable seconds that coincided with bellyaches later. But oh, the sweet release of gorging while temporarily forgetting about the hardships outside. You dance, sing, and consume mediocre mead like there was no tomorrow. But soon enough the revelling would subside and reality would kick right back in, mercilessly snatching your belly full of food and leaving you cradling an increasingly anxious stomach. You'd stare at the empty dishes as if they were harbingers of doom. Ah, the beauty of culinary irony. One moment, your heart is soaring on a wave of flavours. The next, your hopes are dashed against the rocks of arrival day. The day you count the days until the next harvest. But time waits for no man, and the reality would dawn upon you before you knew it. Would the neighbour's cow suffer from intervention in exchange for your well-balanced diet plans? Were the crows letting you know that a lack of foresight meant you'd be dining on whatever you'd gleaned from half-rotten scraps? Maybe only the winds would tell in precisely the wrong direction, and just like that you'd pivot from feasting on joy and abundance to scrounging for scraps in a dismal dance with fate, desperately sealing your dinner with prayers as you dig through the leftovers, hoping to kibosh the misery of hunger for mere moments longer. The spinning wheel of bounty and deprivation was as timeless as the rolling hills in the distance. In retrospect, you could almost hear Mother Nature cackling. Life was but a feast, followed by a lull from reality. Sure, feasts brought merriment, but famine kept everyone humble, or much more accurately, starving for the next chance to rejoice in ill-fated abundance. Time's cruel irony indeed. Noble birthday parties, the height of celebration. Oh, the pageantry of birthday parties for the upper crust. While peasants celebrated their hard-earned milestones with a baked potato and vague hopes of cake, the nobles partied like there was a clock involved, even when there really wasn't. The logical flow of seasons meant little when you could have lavish galas if you forgot someone's name halfway through. Imagine opulent feasts where the tables overflowed with delicacies suited for kings and queens, roasted swan, peacock pie, and enough sugared fruits to make your dentist weep. This was your chance to flaunt your status, to show off wealth, and to remind everyone in attendance just how superior your family line was, at least until Sir Reginald spilled his wine all over Lady Augusta's new dress. As the cold wind swept in, nobles would gather in grand halls adorned with golden tapestries and chandeliers, whose flames danced like tiny suns. Invitations were sent out weeks in advance, each one heralded as ceremonial parchment thicker than a loaf of rye bread, and sealed with wax to signify just how important your presence was, or how insistent the birthday child was about receiving a good gift. You could practically hear the royal trumpets announcing who made the list, and if you didn't, well, that could mean dire social repercussions, like not being invited to next year's harvest hoedown. But how to survive such festivity without the guiding hand of the clock? No worries. Timing was dictated by the sounds of revelry echoing off the stone walls, laughter ringing louder than the expiration date on that swan. The seating arrangement had the complexity of a political treaty, as shifting alliances required strategic placement. Watch your back, though. Everyone knows Cousin Emily has a habit of plotting her gossip from undermining positions near the food. The grand entrance of the birthday child was a sight to behold. Resplendent in layers of velvet and pearls, they would stride into the hall arms wide as if embracing their subjects, because in their minds that's precisely what it was, a kingdom in celebration. Guests would follow suit, forming a living tapestry of glimmering outfits. Amidst the festivities, you might ask, what were they all thinking? Did they wonder if their chosen ensemble would be in fashion next year? Or if the potatoes would be better roasted than the average farmer could muster? As the evening progressed, jesters would spring forth, blending momentary delight with cryptic tales that carried more meaning than any noble dare acknowledge. Clowns would tumble and flip, unspooling jokes that range from humorous to outright ridiculous. Laughter mingled with the aroma of spit-roasted boar. Did they enjoy it, or were they merely too afraid to be outdone by the dizzying spectacle of the night? You bet there was more pressure here than during a high-stakes poker game. When it came time to cut the birthday cake, oh yes, there was often cake, erroneously believed to be delightful. Everyone held their breath like they were watching a swimming competition. Candles glowed like tiny torches of hope on top, asking only to be blown out by the enthusiastic puffs of the birthday child. The more candles, the merrier, even if it looked like a fire hazard that could char the fabric of the world around them. But patience ran thin. No one wants to be the latecomer in this race to extinguish the flames of time. And with a flourish of desserts being passed around, you may wonder, would the taste live up to their expectations, or would it be just as dry as a noble's wit? Amidst the merriment, people would swell with anticipation toward the grandest surprise of all, a gift exchange that reverberated through the ages, to be remembered as the person who gifted a matching set of forks, imported from France, or worse, a gilded spoon. The horror of carrying their own weight in tarnished silver could ruin social standings, and heaven forbid they receive a sack of oats or farm contracts that could settle an estate, a conversation best forgotten before the wine started flowing. As the night slipped deeper into laughter, food, and more food, it became something otherworldly. Nobles filled the air with exaggerated tales of conquest, while subconsciously eyeing their fellow guests to ensure no one had too much fun. Let's be honest, more than one glass of wine spilled over, painting the table linens like abstract art. Yet amid all the chaos there was one undeniable truth. The overarching theme of time was missing. With dusk dancing under the flickering torchlight, time was less a fixed objective than it was a shared laughter amongst friends, the real mark of an unforgettable birthday. So when the next notable birthday rolls around, and your cousin Sid forgets the cake, don't fret. Let the clock roam free, for time doesn't define the memory, the merriment does. Cheers to birthdays of yore, May you treasure the laughter, the food, and the undeniable joy of community, no matter how long that laughter might echo back through time. The mysterious midnight, even the stars were confused. Stargazing wasn't just romantic, it was practically a necessity for keeping track of time. But good luck navigating when those stars are more cryptic than your last Tinder date's profile. You were still left pondering whether you should plant zucchini or wait for a full moon that may or may not be visible through the clouds. Those twinkling celestial reminders could simultaneously guide you and leave you more lost than a toddler in a corn maze. Think you could just ask the North Star for directions? Good luck. It was like asking your grumpy neighbour for a loan. Everyone knows they're not much help, and it's likely to end in disappointment. Every night the sky turned into a market for all the things you didn't understand. Constellations would flash by like billboards. "Hey look," they seemed to shout. "You should be farming, not contemplating your life choices." But there you were, standing in the moonlight, interpreting the Great Bear as a sign to go hunting while simultaneously worrying you'd have to wrestle the neighbour's goat for supper. Meanwhile, there's Cassiopeia, rigidly forming a tussue in the sky, probably laughing at your plight, like a cosmic gossip giggling over dinner. How rude! Astronomy was like a game of charades, yet nobody bothered to hand you the handbook. Sophisticated timekeepers? Not even close. You either learned to recognise the stars by sight or spent the evening in a family debate over whether you were looking at Orion or the remnants of last month's campfire. Picture it, a darkened yard, the smell of wood smoke wafting as your Uncle Greg, the amateur astronomer, passionately declares that Venus is totally the brightest star as you squint at the actual planet hanging out up there, not knowing whether to argue or ask him for advice on your college major. But it gets even comfier when you enter the realm of astronomical events. Ever heard of an eclipse? Imagine trying to explain that you're missing daily errands because the moon went all dark and stuff. Good luck maintaining your reputation as a responsible human when you're spending your afternoon staring up at the sky, instead of tending to the goats you surprisingly forgot you owned. Say goodbye to grocery shopping. You've just entered non-profit stargazing. You're now the local kook who stands outside howling at the celestial bodies while your neighbours comment about your increasing eccentricity over dinner. And then come the seasonal changes, leaving you especially confused. You thought the early summer nights would bring warm breezes and pleasant scents. Surprise! Instead, you're practically inhaling the combined aroma of rain-soaked earth, damp wool, and something that suspiciously smells like old cabbage. As you gaze at the forming clouds, your thoughts drift back to when you were a kid, and your mum warned against spending too much time outside, mostly because the family might not enjoy your choice of company. Mosquitoes seem to be attracted to human skin in the very unfortunate way they search for snacks. Was it too late to go inside? Too late to ask if shooting stars count as fresh hope for an abundant harvest? Navigating life by the stars wasn't a recommendation. It was essential survival. There you stood beside the flock, calculating when you needed to reap, as when. It was just time for some existential crisis. Is that Orion's belt or just the neighbour's sad, mismatched Christmas lights, you pondered? Each star's position seemed to shout reminders that the last time you'd weeded the garden was probably last even-numbered decade. But instead of being productive, all you could manage to do was eat stale bread while glaring at the sky, wondering when you'd trade this for a nice warm tavern and a pint of ale. Before pressing on, let's not forget the moon's role. A full moon wasn't just a pretty picture drawn across the night sky. It was a deadline looming closer than your cousin Frank's desperate need for companionship. Whether you were expecting increased goat productivity or baptizing your bad zucchini crops in moonlight, you needed to heed its phases like a wise counsel, lest you get caught planting too late and end up losing the fertilizer betting on a heavenly body. So as the dusk shadows lengthen, engulfing your hopes for a peaceful night, remember this: when the sun dips low and the stars dance like slightly tipsy wedding attendees, your tomorrow's success hangs on those celestial bodies. It's not just stargazing, it's your very own cosmic commitment to chaotic living, where every twinkle overhead is less about the universe being kind and more about you surviving another day, or at least another night trying to figure out why you even have a garden in the first place. May your floral arrangements always embrace the moonlight, and may your stars guide you, theoretically of course, because in the end, aren't we all just lost little peasants looking up in hopes of receiving a heavenly wink of approval with a side of lunar vagueness? If you thought shopping today was a hassle, imagine having to barter based on the vague idea of it's about midday. In every market, you'd see hurried merchants shouting about products in an aimless dance of patience and panic, gauging their time by the movements of patrons, not a clock in sight. Instead of strolling through supermarket aisles with calming musical scores, or sliding your card to an indifferent machine, you're in a chaotic town square filled with livestock, fruits, and the ever-persistent scent of something that might be edible, or might just be old, questionable leftovers that a brave hamster wouldn't touch. Every element of this scene begs a few key questions. Can you survive a day of bartering with nothing but vague approximations of time? Is there an art to shouting, "Get your apples here," in just the right way to attract attention and keep your dignity intact? And, what do you do if you're feeling just a wee bit peckish while all this commotion unfolds around you? To kick off your day at the market, you wake before the sun has made its full ascent, a dark time when even the roosters have adopted a union mentality and refuse to crow. The warmth of your blanket is tempting, but your stomach's grumbling demands rise more insistently. You throw on your best wool tunic, which is slightly less grimy than the other one. The choice of the day is purely strategic. You can't leave the house looking so dishevelled that even the sheep refuse to follow you home. With a sigh, you grab an old satchel and step out into the morning murk to prepare for a thrilling adventure in ancient commerce. Upon arriving at the market, the atmosphere hits you like a tidal wave. The sounds. Oh, the sounds. Shouts of vendors peddling everything from suspicious fish to mysteriously textured bread fill the air with a cacophony that could wake the dead, or at least a few very disgruntled neighbours. You glance over your shoulder to see a merchant gesturing wildly at what he claims is the best turnip in the kingdom, while another insists that this one will make you plant potatoes faster than a rabbit in spring. You ponder over the implications of that. Why would you need to plant potatoes faster when you can hardly manage to keep track of the ones you already have? Bartering is a ruthless affair, much like a reality TV show where no one has any sense of shame. You've watched people haggle before, but witnessing it up close is a revelation. If a peasant offers 1 chicken for 3 loaves of bread, then that poor fowl had better be able to tap dance on command, or you're not getting any business done. Every offered price is a bargaining war, and each person's negotiation strategy makes you question briefly whether it's better to be a trader or simply become a hermit in the woods. Who needs food when you can have peace and quiet? And since time is nothing but a loose suggestion, the market moves at one pace, the one set by the absolute indifference of the universe. You find yourself waiting impatiently while the guy in front of you haggles over the price of a loaf of bread that may or may not have seen the inside of a rat's nest. As if time's grasp on reality stretched thin, suddenly the day passes. Your hands feel empty, your stomach complains louder than ever, and it turns out you spent more time chatting with a goat than negotiating with actual humans. You might snag a few last-minute apples, or perhaps barter away an old tunic with some questionable stains on it. But as you gather your goods, a fine collection of fruit that may have been bruised 3 different ways, it dawns on you. You forgot the most essential part of modern shopping, the shopping bag. You're left awkwardly clutching various items in your arms, like a medieval juggler attempting to perform an act never destined for the stage. As you make your exit, blends of aromas waft across the marketplace. Sweet pies, pungent cheeses, and something strongly reminiscent of last week's festival leftovers. The hustle and bustle begin to fade into the background, like a forgotten melody, while you contemplate tomorrow's adventure. Because let's be honest, who's actually managing their time properly? You realise perhaps that bartering is less about the material gain and more about socialising and simply finding time to exist within the chaos. And on that thought, your eyes drift toward the horizon, where the sun dips low, already giving up with an admirable sense of punctuality as you embark on yet another early morning back home with a few bruised apples and an existential crisis simmering in your mind. In this lively scene of merchants and mayhem, the rhythm of time may not be entirely clock-centric, but it resonates with a pulse, an understanding that life goes on, with or without measurable minutes. When the sun dipped below the horizon, nighttime fell, and with it people gathered for nightly rituals. In the absence of clock radios, it was all about candles, tales, and spontaneous dances. Got no lights? Hope you're not easily frightened, because candle flame shadows can be just as crazy as that one guy who insists he saw a dragon last Tuesday. The flickering flames would dance along the walls of thatch roof huts, morphing every corner into something eerie and mysterious. Was that a shadow? Or was the neighbour's cat doing an impression of an ancient spirit looking for its lost grain? You see, in a world with no sparklers or fireworks, the idea of nighttime fun was decidedly more organic, less sparkly, and more, I hope we don't get eaten by wolves. Villagers would gather around a central fire, storytelling like it was their Olympic sport. They could spin a tale so entrancing, you'd forget you promised your mother you'd return before moonrise, only to end up questioning your life choices as the sun began flirting with the horizon again. Forget about romantic candlelit dinners that involve reservations. These gatherings featured a potluck of pottage, questionable stew, and maybe a ration of stale bread that was just squishy enough to make you question whether you should ask, "What is this made from?" But as the flickering light illuminated the gathering, there was always one pivotal figure, the storyteller. Armed with a gift for embellishment and a knack for elbows, their job was to outdo the last dragon-sighting rumour that passed through the village, ultimately convincing everyone in the circle that night was a treacherous time best spent listening to his latest outlandish tale about the wild adventures of Sir Geoffrey, Master of Moustaches. According to Geoffrey, he had fought off a band of bandits, but lost a battle against a particularly aggressive pumpkin. The villagers, entranced by his theatrics, would laugh, shiver, and sometimes even weep in fear, wondering if their evening soup would be colourful enough to ward off a rogue squash. While the storytelling became an art form, it served as an informal timekeeper for the evening. No clocks meant you dropped whatever cereal-scented conversation you had for a rousing tale about the time Old Man Rufus got stuck in a chimney. If Old Man Rufus didn't appear by now, it meant you'd swung too far into the night, and perhaps it was time to retreat into the safety of your hovel. Of course, the presence of drunken village revellers sparked a semblance of chaos as they spontaneously joined hands to form circles of dance, twirling around the fire like deranged fireflies on a sugar high. The rhythm was primal and electrifying. It was the ancient world's equivalent of a wild rave, minus the glow sticks. As the villagers hooted and hollered, they created an atmosphere that was equal parts joyous celebration and mild existential dread. In a world riddled with uncertainties, the idea of embracing life, even if it meant risking a tumble into a ditch filled with mud, became a rite of passage. Was it safe? Not remotely. But then again, what fun would it be without a little unpredictable risk mixed with your handcrafted ale? And once the fires began to flicker, signalling that the night was unravelling, you could guarantee that one brave soul would summon enough courage to venture off into the deeper shadows, perhaps to check if the neighbour's goose was in fact a goblin. Was that truly an imp peeking from behind a tree? Or was it merely the spirit of Friday night mischief giggling under a cloak of shadows? Rituals at night weren't solely about fear or joy. They were the necessary connection to a sense of purpose in a world that could be as wild as an unfenced goat. Each gathering, each tale, and even every questionable dance solidified a bond among villagers, crafting memories that would be told and retold in moments of lightheartedness and nostalgia. So, as louder yells and more questionable decisions filled the late hours, villagers wove their stories into the tapestry of night, crafting legends and confirming friendships through the universal language of collective mayhem. Just remember to stay close to the fire and out of the path of runaway goats if you want to survive the night, and to never underestimate the power of a good tale to hold time at bay. What did you do when the clock, or lack thereof, told you the witching hour was nigh? In a world without Buddhas or time-out chairs, mischief, rumours and, oh yes, bonfires ran rampant. Bad first dates are one thing, competing against the choir of ghosts on a foggy night. That's a flaw on the gravestone of your social calendar. As darkness draped the countryside like a scratchy wool blanket, villagers gathered in hushed groups, huddled close enough to share warmth, but far enough apart to avoid side-eyeing each other's latest haircut. You know, nearly all hairstyles were rough-hewn in those days. Picture this. It's late, the sun has vanished like last week's leftovers in your fridge, and suddenly, every half-baked idea seems like the best notion you've ever had. Stories of mischievous fairies and romping spirits floated through the air, each one more outlandish than the last. At the witching hour, the line between reality and the absurd blurred like a bad painting. You might ask yourself, was that a branch cracking or the sound of your neighbour's ghost wandering off with a chicken? At this point, paranoia replaced reason. Was that muffle laugh from far away either genuine mirth or the sound of an insatiable midnight snacker? As the night stretched like your uncle's dad jokes, bonfires flickered like misfit lights on a broken Christmas tree. Those evenings were a veritable buffet for the senses, complete with an aroma of roasting whatever it is, who knows what herbs, and the unintended consequence of everyone's grievances bubbling over like the pot of questionable stew simmering nearby. Ever taken a stroll past a bonfire? Suddenly you'll find yourself feeling courageous enough for inventions like ghost hunting expeditions, or talking to imaginary friends, who may or may not be responsible for the local goat going missing. And speaking of ghost hunting, who defined the rules of spectral sleuthing in the first place? Society had a unique approach to ghostly interactions, one that involved far too little scientific rigour and far too much social judgment. Based on absolutely nothing beyond homespun wisdom and brief encounters with the toothless elderly, if a bird landed on your roof at midnight, it was a sign. You just figured out you'd become a paranormal investigator, all because Aunt Edna said so. Yet, even as you danced, twirled, and possibly channeled some questionable energy around that fire, you had a cosmic conundrum brewing. How late is too late? There weren't any neat bedtimes on the calendar, and with the sun on permanent vacation, it was a stylish chaos. Surely there was no harm in breaking the official curfew. There was hardly a parent to insist you come inside, as they were most likely out trying to convince that crazy old man down the road to stop trying to catch fireflies with a net made of chicken feathers. To enhance these midnight melodramas, typical peasant life added layers of drama akin to the best local theatre production. For example, neighbours exchanged gossip like a family recipe passed down through generations. Did you hear about Marjorie? She swears she met a ghost and then almost set herself on fire trying to cook potatoes at midnight. Caution had no place here. Laughter rang out despite the stakes looming heavy in the inky blackness. And as everyone stirred the pot, or attempted to in a rather symbolic sense, nighttime rituals emerged like ancient rock stars making a comeback. Spirits of the forgotten legends held sway across fields where hay bales sat forlornly in gentle silence. People secretly hoped that these spirited entities might bless them with wisdom, or at the very least, a recipe for turning stale bread into pudding, a culinary victor on the witching hour menu. So, as you gathered with your peers around the dim glow of the bonfire, contemplating your newest adventure of spirited discovery, remember this. The deeper you delve into the witching hour, the more blurred reality comes. A mischievous ghost might rob you of sheep, but laughter shared with friends. That's an ethereal bond built on delightful absurdity. It's best to revel in that timeless chaos, so raise a toast to the witching hour, where every bad idea has the potential to become a legendary tale, or at least a really bad date story your great-grandkids might share one day around their also non-existent clocks. Forget pencils and paper. Comic relief meant musical storytelling around the hearth. Each song counted like a clock for distant eras, as bards crafted tales reflecting the rhythms of life, wars, and wondering how much time you spent talking to your neighbour's goat again. You see, when the sun set and shadows loomed large, people gathered around flickering flames, eager to be whisked away on epic adventures without the burden of actual passage time. It wasn't about checking your watch, it was about catching the story of the century told in raucous melodies loud enough to wake that lazy goat, who probably had better plans than listening to yet another saga about the time Chelmsford III single-handedly defeated the evil Baron of Donuts. With no clocks to confine their evenings, villagers enjoyed a much looser approach to time management. The bards would strum their lutes and sing, dragging you through battles fought under moon's light, feasts that lasted until someone inevitably turned the pig into pet food, and whispered love stories that would make even the most cynical amongst you believe in the romantic possibilities of a shared loaf of stale bread. Imagine sipping that sweet cereal-like concoction, aka whatever passed for ale, and laughing until you nearly spilled it all over the goat. The true tragedy of the evening was often not the ballads themselves, but the mortifying image of you in a puddle of regret. One might argue that those musical storytellers were the clockhands of society, keeping the beat of life alive while their audiences happily lost track of the hours. Their songs would weave through time and tradition, occasionally causing unintentional rifts between locals and royalty. For instance, sing about a cheeky thief winning a noblewoman's heart, and the townsfolk would find themselves in stitches, while a nearby lord scowled in disapproval, wondering how long until he could leave without being mired in an awkward ballad about his ill-fated attempts to woo the very same woman. Which was great for entertainment, not so great for courtly relations. And don't even think about the rhythm of time that the artists introduced. A raucous, good time. Stop for a moment. Imagine if people built their schedules around the melodrama of music. Could you set your appointments by the number of verses? I'll be there with the cow just as soon as the second chorus is over. Who needed sundials when you could chart the day by the ebb and flow of stories sung by accomplished minstrels? Suddenly, the Courgette Festival didn't seem nearly as urgent as hearing how Torvald the Terrible learned the meaning of love through a wandering minstrel's song. To navigate the story's highs and lows without a stopwatch added its own flair to life. Were you to arrive late to the apocalyptic tale of Doomsday Rufus? A quick wink and a casual shrug would largely suffice as your "I have indeed not been waiting outside like an anxious barn cat for the gates of purgatory to open" acknowledgement. It was all part of the game. If the bards were skilled enough, they'd create an impromptu time pass through rudimentary charts that would make even the dullest of mathematics appear like Picasso's finest work. But it wasn't just amusing for daily life. These songs also encoded complex histories that would be handed down through generations, long before anyone even thought about writing them down. Take that famous tune about the Great Potato Uprising of 1150. A toe-tapping anthem that told you everything from how the peasants revolted against bad mash to the heart-wrenching deception by that one harlot known as Tilly Two Fingers. Every sweet note showcased moments that stopped being mere happenings and morphed into epic landmarks. Unfortunately, landmarks that tended to shift every time a bard got tipsy after too many flagons of ale. By the time the bards strummed their last chords, the sun would be peeking over the horizon, illuminating what exactly had transpired during the night's eternal revelry. With gasps of shock, collective sighs of relief, and perhaps a few newfound romances sparked in the flame-kissed shadows, their patrons would stagger groggily home, completely oblivious to the ultimate passage of time. After all, who needed a clock when you had a heart full of memories, a belly full of ale, and an endless sky above to guide you? And that, my dear friend, was the ancient art of using song to measure time before sundials and pocket watches made life unnecessarily restrictive. You might have strolled home under the stars, convinced the night was yours, at least until the rooster interrupted your dreaming with a crow, making you wonder just when enough was really enough, and reminding you to avoid unnecessary conversations with goats. Celestial events and their impact on time-telling. Solar eclipses were nature's way of messing with you, like a mischief maker hiding your keys. Would you be late to the crop festival because the moon decided to take centre stage? Yes, and good luck finding anyone who even remotely understood what was going on. Picture this. It's a bright sunlit afternoon, your busy day outlined by the position of the globe above you. In a world governed by the whims of the cosmos, that ball of fiery gas is your clock, and you are living your best solar-powered life. But when that curious moon slyly creeps in front of the sun, total chaos ensues. Suddenly it's as if you've wandered into the world of children's theatre, with props tipping over and actors wildly improvising their lines. People run through the streets acting like it's Armageddon, sheep bleat, and your neighbour, Old Man Thompson, starts wailing about how the end times are finally upon us, all because of a temporary shadow. No one really knows whether to laugh or cry, but you're left standing in the middle of the field, wondering if you should plant beans or just run away to the hills. And to think, one little cosmic event turned every single harvest prayer into a desperate conversation with the Almighty. Feeling like a deity would be ideal. Alas, no one has a clue about that mysterious celestial waltz happening above their heads, and it's not just eclipses that could throw you off. Oh no, there are planetary alignments, comets zooming by, and the fluctuations of the moon itself dictating the rhythm of life like an uninvited DJ at a party. You've got a wedding next week. Hope you haven't forgotten to check if the stars are in a good mood. The last thing you need is Aunt Gertrude's nasty cold because you got hit by a meteor shower and she swears it was your fault for dusting off the wedding sheets during a waxing gibbers. And if all this seems unpredictable, guess what? The weather had its own cosmic alarm clock. A rainy day meant a washout on your carefully planned festivities. The ever-dreaded rains not abiding by any schedule, including the occasional hailstorm that turned your small settlement into a medieval version of a natural disaster zone. If you thought getting drenched during a wedding was bad, imagine the realization that your harvest was being pulverized by ice the size of small eggs. That's the kind of drama that has folks second-guessing their life choices until the next solar event. Now, you couldn't just sit around and wait for celestial events to happen while pondering your next game of what if. You had to act. This spurred a culture of astrology among wise men, or at least those who fancied themselves wise. Stargazers, who were often more like travelling salesmen, peppered their prophecies with a cocktail of hope, dread, and half-baked interpretations of the upset celestial schedule. With their charts and star maps rolled up like modern-day scrolls of questionable advice, they were ready to convince you why planting potatoes on the equinox was a terrible idea, or why that full moon means you definitely should not be getting married right now. Meanwhile, the seasons marched on, and to know when to plant and harvest, you would have needed a complete understanding of when the stars decided to align for a good crop. Want to plant apples? Forget it if Mercury's in retrograde, folks. Who's got the time for a bad orchard? You could branded that unfortunate neighbour who planted more rotten apples than anyone dared to contemplate, merely because your astrology chart didn't match the fertility cycle of the year. But then, hopefully amidst the cosmic chaos, you had the good old community grapevine. That one old woman at the market using her uncanny ability to predict the time by aligning the movements of hens and their clucking. Legit or not, you began to trust her over the accursed sky turner. With her you could discern the subtle signs of spring's arrival or the ominous approach of the frosty winter. So, whether cursing the eclipse that robbed you of an afternoon, or high-fiving the stars for guiding you to the right planting day, one thing was clear. Life without clocks was an ongoing adventure where every day was a celestial surprise. Some days you learned what misery meant based on your neighbour's weather-driven decisions. In other moments, you rejoiced as the sun slowly emerged after an eclipse, offering a fresh start to make good on your missed appointments. Life without clocks was less of a straightforward schedule and more of an accidental spin down a cosmic merry-go-round. And as you nestled into your haystack bed that night, you'd likely dream about the stars and their slight to your harvest. Sure, life was unpredictable, but with that unpredictability came a certain charm. A final reminder that the universe's sense of humour would always delight and confuse you, like wandering through a labyrinth built by cosmic clowns where only the strong of heart ever found their way. What a time indeed! Trying to dine before darkness falls was like trying to sprint before the finish line during a marathon. You'd better make it quick. Once the oil lamps flickered, you either wrapped up your meal or determined what leftovers could survive until daybreak. Horror stories of midnight raids by neighbourhood raccoons or even marauding cats would circulate, as empty stomachs and overzealous wildlife became best friends the moment dinner had long gone cold. The idea of a fancy dinner with multiple courses was purely a figment of one's imagination. Instead, a pot of porridge sat on the hearth, bubbling away like a perplexed math problem demanding to be solved. The vegetable soup, a word loosely used in the term soup here, was whatever you had lingering from the garden that hadn't gone bad or confused itself with compost. Turnips became the theme of every meal, tangled up with other mismatched ghosts of last week's harvest. Imagine filling your bowl with a concoction that looked reminiscent of swamp water, served alongside a hunk of bread that was a little tough to chew, and possibly a lot tougher to digest. Think of it as a game of chance. Will my stomach survive this, or should I write my last goodbye in the dirt? Dining on that hearty meal was accompanied by the constant chorus of household clamour, cattle mooing outside, children crying, and the odd neighbour wondering whether anyone was home until dinner inevitably went stone cold. If you were lucky, supper could be a splendid affair amongst family, serving up anecdotes sharper than the daggers some could conjure in a pitch-black room. Maybe it'd even be a gentle discussion of your neighbour's goats interspersed with the snickers of sound advice, or sly insinuations about Aunt Gertrude's questionable bathing habits. Just get to the point. I have to finish before darkness, you might lament to your relatives amid the clatter of wooden utensils, if the utensils weren't splintered by now. Perhaps you could even critique the texture of your bread, while secretly wondering if you could use it for armour in case marauding squirrels burst into the house demanding their portion of the evening's bounty. However, dining by daylight wasn't strictly about survival. It was also about the masterful art of portion control, shrouded in a sense of drama and improvisation. How quickly could one carry on the conversation while gorging on a single potato slice? Time management was paramount. If the food was particularly bad, it was fine to chew thoughtfully while silently contemplating how one might die during the night from foodborne illness. A creative horror story worth recounting over your porridge in the morning. As the sun dipped lower, an eternal threat loomed over culinary planners. The dire countdown to darkness felt as inexorable as an encroaching army. Would those last bites of your scant meal suffice? Or would you have to confront the nightmare of suffering through another long night's hunger? Those who dined alone faced a grim fate. The possibility of their food being devoured by roaming vermin and any remaining crumbs left behind. If the cats, dogs and various four-legged freeloaders were anything like medieval guardians, you were bound to lose the battle. And don't forget about the wild probabilities lurking among your family members, the cunning expressions lurking in their eyes, and hidden strategies to connive at your meal. As you cautiously flipped your half-eaten turnip, your brother might very well be waiting to swipe the good stuff when you least expected it. One short glance away to the fun of family banter. "Hey, you looked away. Where's your potato now?" To add to the culinary mischief simmering under the surface, dining didn't end with a bow. No, it could just as easily circle back for an encore. Mid-meal, if the rotting scraps had any hint of usefulness left, everyone learned the delicate balance of reintegration. Any chance of leftover pottage had its own fate. It was either polished off or sealed for the next day, creating an unpredictable treasure recovery situation for anyone brave enough to open their larder in the dark. By the time evening approaches and darkness drapes your hovel like a threadbare blanket, you're left reflecting on the absurdities of a world without clocks, one where eating has strong ties with survival against the impending horror of emptiness. It is, after all, a delicate dance between dinner and darkness, one filled with laughter, panic, and a touch of ridiculousness that would be just as familiar in centuries to come. Now, as the oil lamps begin to flicker like your chances of life with unfinished dinner, take a moment. The question lingers. Was that the last hunk of bread, or did your neighbours also get hungry at the worst possible moment? Weather Patrol, the unsung timekeepers of old, didn't feel like checking the wooden timepiece. Then try that age-old classic, observing the sky. If clouds rolled in, it's morning. If it started to rain, time to whip out the spare pair of socks. Good luck keeping track of each millisecond as mud weighs you down. That's right, folks. In the grand timeline of existence, the horizon was often the true clock, a crude but effective tool for gauging the flow of everyday life. So, welcome to the fabulous world of weather forecasting medieval style, where your best friend was a tattered piece of sheep wool flapping steadfastly in the wind. Imagine this. You're standing outside, armed only with your instincts and an unsettling fear of getting drenched. Dark clouds gather ominously above. Are they approaching for a refreshing sprinkle or an all-out biblical deluge? It's like trying to read the mood at a family reunion. The adjacent farmer is checking the sky too, assessing the state of his crops as he scratches his head, wondering if this gloomy mass is God's way of saying, "Not today, my child," or "Good luck harvesting." But, oh, the rain. Picture it cascading down, a torrent that might wash away your hopes of a peaceful afternoon. Yet, on the bright side, it creates the perfect moment to slosh through puddles like a toddler, momentarily forgetting the responsibilities that boil down to, well, surviving another day. Nothing says I manage my time adequately, quite like soiled shoes and squishy socks. Ah, and let's not forget about the sun, the grand overseer of our temporal struggles. When it rises in the morning, it waves a big "What's up, sleepyhead?" and sets the agenda for the day. No sun? Well, you must have slept in or made an enemy of the clouds, who were indeed not in your favour that morning. And have you ever noticed how the sun has the audacity to scorch the ground like a bad relationship, forcing you into the predicament of deciding whether you dare to sweat through your tunic or risk a face-off with a local ghost trying to convince you to take a dip in the river? Now let's chat about wind. Yes, wind. Who knew it would hold such power in the medieval clock of life? There's summer wind, which feels like a gentle caress urging you to frolic in the fields, and then there's the biting winter wind that makes you contemplate every life choice, leading you to stand unprotected in the cold. While you may have zero access to a digital weather app, the weather can be seen as an old-fashioned clock that swings, sways and dances to its rhythm. Check the wind. That'll tell you when to expect a storm or whether it's just passing through. And how could we possibly get excited about a good old-fashioned weather vane? These contraptions were often bedecked on roofs like crowns on thatched heads, pointing to the whimsical mood of the ethers. Imagine a disgruntled farmer getting frustrated with the weather, vane stubbornly facing south while darkening clouds from the west heave above his crops like an overstuffed turkey ready to burst. The farmer stands there, arms crossed, whispering sweet nothings to the vane, willing it to give him one accurate signal on when to plant or harvest. Now let's chat about survival. For the enterprising weekly market days were timed around weather predictions, allowing villagers to scurry about like caffeinated ants, desperately hauling goods from one stall to another. What's that? The sun is shining bright. Quick, sell the perishable goods before they go south. Or better yet, sell a stray sheep. Yet through all this cloud watching and weather reckoning, let's not forget one fundamental truth. The joy of the imminent weather-related disaster. Rainy days meant appropriate idleness. Sitting by the fire, dreaming up legends of grand escapades and contemplating that fated trip upwards into the village for essential bread, characterised by unplanned bowls of warming stew, shared stories, and the revelation that together you could weather any storm, literal or metaphorical, with your neighbours. So here's to the weather, timekeeper, icon of uncertainty, and undeniable muse of chance. If it casts shadows or pours rain, it beckons you to live recklessly within its embrace, reminding us all that perhaps clocks are for the impatient. Weather has its own chapter in the book of time, and the world is a better place for it. After all, it teaches us to adapt, survive, laugh at the chaos, and embrace the joy of simply letting the day unfold, one cloud, one gust of wind, and one muddy boot at a time. Feast days were a booming time to mark the calendar, while famine days felt like a post-apocalyptic novel. Daring a guess at how long it would take until food reappeared? Probably more guesswork than any clock could help you with. Feast days had an undeniable rhythm. They were like the clockwork of the medieval universe, churning with frantic energy and culinary ambitions. People from miles around would gather, donning their Sunday best, or what they mistakenly thought was their Sunday best, which often looked suspiciously similar to their working clothes. Flies buzzed overhead like party crashers at a wedding, and the aromas wafting through the air were so enticing they could make a stone statue weep. If it had a nose to appreciate the situation. And the food. Oh, the glorious food. At the centre of each celebration was a massive table struggling under the weight of pottage, roasted meats, and other delights that shamed any other meal of the week. Think Thanksgiving, but with a sprinkle of desperation. There were meats roasted with reckless abandon, stew pots bubbling away, spilling secrets of dubious ingredients that could make even a crow question its dietary choices. And let's not forget the bread, stale, crusty and tough enough that it could double as home defence against marauding neighbours, or at the very least, a sinewy snack for whichever farm animal looked at you the wrong way. Now, let's discuss famine days, which felt less like a regular occurrence and more like an uninvited guest set to disrupt your life. You've just returned to your dirt floor after a day of grueling labour, only to discover that the bread has run out, the fruits have spoiled, and your pantry consists of a few sad turnips, which, if you're honest, have begun to look more like wrinkled feet than food. On famine days, you might find yourself staring at a twist of straw, trying to imagine it was a nice warm loaf of bread. Spoiler alert, it wasn't. Instead, you'd take stock of whatever was left. A deeply philosophical conversation with your family about whether consuming the last of the ale was a legitimate meal. Calendars. On famine days, you weren't counting down to anything noteworthy. The rhythm of your life became a muddled mishmash of deprivation and survival. Did anyone even know what day it was? You were reduced to checking if the sun was still there, not for solar timing, but simply to gauge whether you were still alive. If you could see the sun, you could try your hand at asking round for favours, which quite frankly felt like charming a particularly stubborn goat into giving you another day of survival. When the feast day finally rolled around, it made the preceding famine days feel like a long-lost nightmare. You withstood those grueling weeks, only to throw yourself headlong into the mirth of merriment. The village square would erupt with laughter, music and games, while grudgingly competitive neighbours put their best foot forward. Young folks lined up to test their skills, racing with wooden swords made from whatever old barn wood was lying around, testing their dexterity and their friendships along with their stomachs, as snacks were filled with mystery ingredients. Still, you had to be careful. The enthusiasm of a feast day could quickly devolve into chaos. Disputes over who had the right to that last piece of roasted mutton could escalate faster than you could say, "Watch out for the potato." Imagine trying to enjoy a meal while simultaneously dodging thrown vegetables or gossip that could cut deeper than any knife. It was a moment akin to playing dodgeball with your dinner while actively questioning if this was worse than starvation. Physical sustenance or debilitating embarrassment. Often it was a thin line. Ultimately, feast and famine days were lessons wrapped in fortitude and friendship, improvisation and trust. As you absorbed the fullness of those feast days, you felt grateful, not just for food, but for community, camaraderie, and the familial bonds made stronger by shared struggle. Because in the end, when the banquet settled into silence and the remnants of glory lay scattered across tables, it was the laughter, warmth, and a tightly woven community that measured the time, and that was always worth celebrating. Tidal changes, the original water timers. For coastal dwellers, the tide was like that friend who turns up an hour early for dinner with a basket of questionable snacks. You could set your life around it, trust it, or fluff it. But it definitely gave you a heads up if dinner was going to be fishy. The ocean wasn't just blue, it was a fickle companion dictating the rhythm of life. Rising and falling with the grace of an overzealous ballerina, the tide set the stage for everything from fishing expeditions to, let's be honest, a spontaneous game of let's see who can outrun the wave. Spoiler, we all lose. Imagine waking up in a time when watch faces weren't even a glimmer in someone's eye. Instead, you'd step outside and look out at the shoreline trying to decipher what the waves were wearing that day. On a good day, you'd find your guide in the gentle ebb and flow. The tide would push and pull, as if it was whispering secrets about when to do laundry, or to cancel your plans in favour of more pressing matters, like deciding who would be lucky enough to catch crabs for dinner. Because let's face it, nothing screams "let's eat" quite like watching the tide reveal the crustaceans. Of course, these tides were not all fun and games. Timing your fishing trips was critical. If the tide went out and you were still out there trying to reel in a catch, you might find yourself stranded among splintered boats, or worse, dealing with a very angry crab. And when the tide rose again, the fish might be in an entirely new area, rendering your efforts as useful as a soggy piece of bread. Good luck finding anything to eat if you misread the water. But it wasn't just about fishing. As the tides dictated daily life, social calendars were also set to the backdrop of the waves. Communities would gather for elaborate beach festivals when the tide was low, ideal for setting up bonfires, competitively building sandcastles, or initiatively stirring up a competition for who could throw the heaviest rock without hitting anyone's goat. Those were the days you didn't need wristwatches. You only had to look to the horizon to know when it was time to party, or run away from a rogue wave. Who knew that beach life could come with so many rules about timing? However, let's not forget the pure chaos of relying on Mother Nature as your primary timekeeper. With weather patterns just as unpredictable as your neighbour's wild children, a sudden squall would barrel in, ruining a good day of fishing and socialising. When that happened, you'd have no choice but to huddle beneath makeshift shelters, while debating how you might magically manifest the courage to run back to your home without becoming a human lightning rod. Speaking of homes, could you imagine the panic when a high tide turned your quaint seaside abode into a beachfront property, seemingly overnight? 1 minute you're pacing the floor over dinner plans, and the next you're contemplating how to salvage your wooden floorboards from the rising sea. Forget insurance claims. Your method of ensuring your house remained intact was simply a gamble with the ocean that involved common sense and a bit of luck. Blessed are the interpretive dancers who could wrangle both. Through all of this, the tides also held a dual nature, oscillating between delivering bounty and breaking dreams. A lackadaisical fisherfolk might boast about today's catch only to wake up tomorrow, greeted by the scent of salt water and remorse as they realised they'd have to shell out the last of their coins for whatever measly sardine they could find at the market. A true lesson in the cycles of life. Tides had an arcane way of reminding you that fortunes can change as swiftly as the water against the shore. So next time you're feeling overwhelmed by obligations marked by clocks or calendars, perhaps take a page from the Book of Coastal Folk. Embrace the tides, celebrate the unpredictability, and remember that it may just be time to let go of rigid constructs. Leaning into the undulating rhythm of life may be the secret sauce for surviving the parts of this world we can't always control. After all, who needs a clock when you've got the ocean doing all the heavy lifting? Now, I double-dog dare you to try explaining this philosophy to your calendar-loving best friend. Good luck with that. Stories told around the fire would set small time markers, symbolising the positions of moral compasses. Need a mythical excuse for arriving late? Just pull a plot twist worthy of an Oscar and blame the evil sorcerer. I promise it was well accepted. After all, nothing can rally a crowd like an imaginative tale about quests spanning weeks that seem to distract entire villages from the slow crawl of time. Yes, storytelling was an art form of the highest order, so much so that punctuality was viewed as a mere suggestion. Much like that time you promised your boss you'd hand in your report ASAP, only for it to morph into an artistic endeavour best completed in the next lifetime. Picture yourself settling down by the fire, surrounded by your fellow villagers. The air is thick with the aroma of roasted meat and unwashed feet. What a delightful cocktail of scents. Someone cracks open a jug of questionable ale, and the night officially becomes a testing ground for who can tell the most captivating story. As the fire flickers, a bard emerges, his wild hair a chaotic testament to a life well lived or poorly managed. It's hard to say. With an exaggerated flourish, he begins his tale of adventure and woe, stretching the meaning of once upon a time into something that sounds suspiciously like I just got back from being lost for a month." As he spins his yarn, introducing epic monsters, enchanted forests, and ill-fated chickens — there's always a chicken — you find the threads of time slipping between your fingers like the soggy bread you accidentally dipped in last week's stew. It's astounding how well-crafted tales could compress months of existence into a mere hour, while making you feel as if you lived it all. Forget about calendars. In a world where the sun and moon play the role of clock hands, your sense of time starts behaving more like a drunk relative at a wedding. Totally unpredictable. The bard in his glory sets out on this fateful journey, where days blend into each other, and nights are for dancing under the stars, unless, of course, that becomes a convenient plot point for an ominous thunderstorm, which, quite frankly, happens way more often than you'd care to admit. How can it be a week if I just danced all day and sang all night? You ponder. Time. What a concept. You start collecting imaginary tickets to time, standing in line behind the mythical beast you've come to adore. You'd assume they operate outside time as well, considering their speed in devouring everything in sight. While we sit there, entranced, you can't help but notice Grandfather in the corner, using his famous, serious face to pull you back to earth, grading the show's timeliness like a ravenous hawk. After all, he can always turn this sentiment into a story about the time he saved a village from a marauding hen, which definitely cost several days, but would never get counted as time lost. It'd just blend into the epic saga of his life, becoming more of a family legend than a mere breakfast misadventure. Did you hear about the day when Farmer Ben underestimated the harvest moon? He would interject, gathering a chuckle or two. He arrived for the feast weeks late. Turns out a cunning raccoon was to blame, whispering riddles and hiding the corn. Laughter erupts as we realise that even the simplest of tasks becomes a production worthy of a full cast. Countless days lost because time had all the enthusiasm of a grasshopper on a caffeine high. It hops and skips but rarely goes in a straight line. But as the fire burns low, there's a sudden reminder that when tales of time travel fade, life demands a sudden pivot. Days resume their mundane roles, without promise, leaving you to sift through daily chores and rudimentary responsibilities far removed from your evening's escapades. Like that one time the bard decided leading a band of merry men to find misplaced shrubs was considered a rightful quest, a legitimate adventure thrilling enough to eclipse any ticking seconds. In the end, those whimsical stories, grand though they are, subtly remind us of life's greatest lesson. Every minute holds value, even when obscured by enchanting fables and the comfort of long, meandering narratives. Time may march onward, impervious to our musings and adventures, but for those brief moments by the fire, it becomes what we believe it to be, a canvas for incredible tales, pulled from the wrinkled fabric of time itself. Just don't forget to blame the sorcerer for your tardiness. After all, it's an age-old tradition passed down through generations of folks who always suspected that reality was just a trifle more mundane than the tales told under starlit skies. Ever notice that time, once so fluid, became something you had to manage in methods that left you guessing a little too often? Conversations filled with, "What time is that?" felt like the world's slowest math problem, and you just wanted a shortcut. Picture this. You're trying to organise a gathering in the 13th century. Your only tools, an ancient sundial, an owl that cares about as much as your neighbours do, and a loose understanding of how the earth spins. Somebody shouts, "Dinner!" But you have no idea if they meant at sundown, daylight's last glow, or right after Jim finishes his lengthy and somewhat questionable tale about fighting off an overzealous raccoon. And don't even get me started on the possible confusion over the terms of the day. Imagine someone shouting, "What's the time?" and everybody peers into the equally perplexing horizon of what constitutes morning, afternoon, or the dreaded when it'll be dark enough for the badgers to think a party is going on. Conversations about scheduling could last longer than actual meetings. Instead of setting a time, you learned to agree on vague phrases that made it sound like it was part of a secret language only understood by local livestock. Now let's say you're a merchant in one of those bustling markets. The sun is halfway up, and you're just trying to sell your goods while keeping an eye on those notoriously slow-moving chickens. You approach Bob, the baker, who also serves as the unofficial town clock. "What time should I head to the fishmonger?" you ask him, praying for a coherent answer. He strokes his beard thoughtfully, squints at the sky, and finally states, "When the sun looks like it's about to wiggle." Well, that's hardly a precise indication, but you'll make do, since your very survival hangs on whether you procure decent fish before the sunset. You scurry off when the sun looks vaguely jiggly. Communication gaps like these were standard. You often depended on facial expressions, gestures, or even the mood of your nearby goat to set your schedule. That goat was practically a community councilman. You'd glance over, waiting for it to start chewing thoughtfully. It was a clear indication that another breathtakingly ambiguous sunrise was on the horizon, and possibly you'd better step up your game if you wanted to nab that last hunk of cheese. Life in a pre-clock society had every individual running late, not because they wanted to, but often because, well, dinosaurs were apparently still roaming, and time was inconsequential in the vast expanse of chaos around you. You learned to stay patient, accept miscommunications, and embrace a relative optimism about the universe's timing. Want to gather the flock for sheep shearing? Just tell them to arrive early, meaning they'll show up sometime between later today and about the next equinox. And there were the latecomers. Yes, the unpredictable guest who always showed up during lunch and somehow made the meal about 10 times more complicated. Instead of just showing up on time, they strolled in well after the main course, somehow managing to knock over the punch and blame the bread for being too stiff. You stew in both annoyance and resentment while you contemplate how on earth they could have confused a midsummer's day with the arbitrary time that extended each meal into a swirling abyss of misinterpreted schedules. But it wasn't just social gatherings where miscommunication ruled with an iron fist. When serious matters had to be discussed, like when to plant crops or which local lord's taxes were due, convenient timing slipped into oblivion. "Meet me at high noon" could easily translate to "I'll find you sometime when the shadows take longer than 5 minutes to lengthen." Trust me, you never wanted your fate chained to something ambiguous. The timeless dance between chaos and community continued. In a world where meticulous timekeeping wasn't merely ignored, but entirely disregarded, people formed connections through chaos. They relied on shared experiences and a communal sense of rhythm for life's greatest events. And somehow, they thrived in that glorious ambiguity, finding humour in their misunderstandings. So, as you lay in bed tonight, consider the tales of your ancient ancestors who managed to live through the perplexing puzzles of their day without watches, calendars, or even a faint clue about how to grasp their fleeting hours. They faced each day like a clock that had stopped working, confusing but vibrantly alive, always drawing laughter from lost time. In doing so, perhaps they've left us something far more valuable. The promise that sometimes it's the absurdity of life that keeps the beats of our hearts ticking along long past the sunset. Each festival was a race against an unseen timer ticking down to sundown. Will you make it to the festival prep before darkness sends the bugs out, or will you miss it for the moonlit mystery beyond? As the daylight waned, excitement in the air crackled like fireworks waiting to explode. Villagers bustled around as if they were the last caged kangaroos on Earth, darting from stall to stall, picking up everything from food to fancy baubles that, let's be honest, probably wouldn't last longer than a bad soufflé. Giant bonfires were built like community crisis centres, feeding not just the flames but also everyone's desire to pretend they weren't contemplating yet another winter of dwindling rations. These fires would serve two purposes: ignite the sky with warm, dancing shadows, and provide a rather unfortunate amount of smoke that would inevitably get in your eyes just as you tried to impress that cute villager from 2 fields over. That's right. You wouldn't just be dodging flames, but also your own embarrassing face as you fanned your eyes with your palm, hoping nobody noticed. As darkness fell, the feast began. Or let's face it, what you hoped would be a feast. Imagine a banquet of undercooked meats, stale bread, and whatever seasonal veggies were on their last legs. It was less of an appetizing meal and more of an art project gone horribly wrong. The fragrant aroma wafting from the pots was more akin to a perplexing blend of odd spices and last week's leftovers. You took a deep breath, gulped down the scent of despair, and wondered how much patience it would take before you resigned yourself to a diet of fermented turnips again. But the true spectacle came when the music started. A cacophony of wildly different instruments and passionate voices harmonizing in a way that sounded suspiciously like a group of cats competing for attention. It was hard to pinpoint the fragile, barely tuned strings of the one-stringed lyre, or the hollow drums that painted a picture of villagers missing structural integrity within their own homes. Yet somehow, this blend of chaos ignited the spirit of celebration. You clapped along rhythmically, or at least you tried, which in turn made you wonder if you might accidentally start a new dance craze, or become that one person everyone would tell stories about for years to come. Of course, where there's merriment, there's also the social dynamics rumbling beneath the surface. That couple over there engaging in an awkward dance, grimacing and whispering, certainly felt like the bell curve of village relationships. Were they flirting or actively considering the consequences of leaving the marriage? Who could tell? Small-town gossip was practically a full-time job, and festivals were prime commentary material. If you didn't craft a good scandal during the festive atmosphere, you might as well have worn a sign saying, "I'm neither fun nor chaotic, and my existence is very boring," as the night deepened and the stars emerged to cast their indifferent gazes upon the festivities. The festival dances intensified. It was a highly competitive scene, akin to your favourite reality competition show. Graciously, you sat back and let the athletic footwork remind you of your own 2 left feet. Surely someone would trip before the night was over, and let's hope you weren't invited to intervene. Who wouldn't love to have their hat knocked off by a wildly enthusiastic dancer? Or worse, a guest rage-hugging you in the name of exhilarating chaos, all while you pretended you weren't just trying to eat a suspiciously bland potato pancake in peace. But the most surreal moment of the night came with the traditional storytelling by firelight. An old crone, perhaps long overdue for a dose of modernity, would begin recounting tales of monsters, gods, and the occasional downer about the corrupt lord of the neighbouring village who had just raised taxes by the price of a loaf. As your attention drifted amidst the flavours of ale and the rising chorus of dragon warriors, you couldn't help but wonder, why was it always the same guy raising up drama from history? This was not just entertainment. This was a seriously low-budget opera at best. Then, there it was. The inevitable end to all festivities. The dreaded, "let's pack this up before the bugs get really rowdy" glance. Within moments the energy dwindled, laughter began to transform into reluctant yawns, and villagers began inching toward their humble abodes, the magical electricity of the evening slowly unravelling as they slipped into the darkness. And just like that, time didn't seem as important as it did when you were hunting for romance over dinner. the festival felt like a fragile moment that both stood still and raced by, grasping at fleeting joys before they vanished into the night, leaving only the memory of laughter mingling with smoke and shadows. So as you find yourself trudging home, swollen with too much food and whimsy, you might just wonder how the next festival will play out, what triumphs will be celebrated, what scandals will surface, and whether or not you'll have to dodge a roasting rabbit the size of your last 2 meals combined. If there's one thing you can take away from this peasant party, it's that with each festival you'll just have to race against the setting sun all over again. Socialise while letting the world spin on. Communal days meant a free-for-all gathering. Whether it was individuals marking out numbers in the dirt or dancing away their clumsiness under the moonlight, everyone was invited to the impromptu fun. Imagine a bustling village square, the epicentre of social chaos where the only things scheduled were accidents waiting to happen. Kids tugging at their parents, ducks waddling about with a supreme sense of purpose, and that one person who decided today was the day they would finally attempt to impress their crush with a somersault that definitely ended in a faceplant. Ah, communal days, when time was measured not in hours, but in laughter, and the occasional urgent need to flee from a rogue goat. As the sun began its routine descent, people trickled in from all corners of the village, creating a swirling mosaic of colours, smells, and questionable hygiene standards. No watch needed here. Instead, you'd glance at the sun and its inevitable plummet toward the horizon and think, time to gather, or maybe to snack on some questionable leftovers one of my charming neighbours brought. You might be praying the mysterious meat pie is not from Sir Gristlebutt, the village butcher whose idea of freshness was yesterday's leftovers from last week. And let's not forget the dancing. In a time when moving to the rhythm of life didn't require playlists or cell phones, there were spontaneous dance-offs fueled by pure joy, or maybe just pure insanity. An enthusiastic fiddler would begin playing, likely someone's cousin who barely understood the difference between notes but figured out that noise often beats quiet. The villagers would jump up as if the floor had ingested an electric current, each step an awkward masterpiece. Suddenly everyone was a dancer, pirouetting with varying degrees of grace, while others attempted to invent new dance moves that could only be described as the flail. Try elbows in the ribs and a high kick into someone's face. Oh yes, that's communal life at its most diplomatic. Soon, as night fell and the stars began to twinkle overhead, the village transformed into a delightful spectacle of shimmering lanterns, their flickering light battling off dark shadows that crept just a little too close for comfort. The smell of freshly baked bread mingled with something much less appetizing, as a daring cook from down the street used the communal gathering to showcase their famous stew, a thick concoction that could only be rivaled in intrigue by the mystery meat pie from earlier. Naturally hungry people quickly surrounded this steaming pot, debating whether the initial pinch of it was worth the risk. Little did they know, one taste, and they may have just become the recipient of an ill-timed stomach rebellion. As these gatherings waned into the early hours, you'd hear tales woven into the fabric of history, legends recounted as dramatically as if they were scripts for an upcoming production, each storyteller adding more flair than the last. By the time someone claimed the village was once terrorized by a dragon, that everyone agreed was just a goose with an attitude, you'd find yourself captivated in the rapture of it all. A place where daily life morphed into heroic sagas as the fire crackled. Even time transformed into a delightful melody, repeated around the flickering embers. You'd witness clusters forming around the fire, one group plotting to summon the village's plague doctor, because they definitely heard old Aunt Madge from 2 crofts over coughing. Better to curb that outbreak before it even begins. Meanwhile, the rest entered a raucous debate over who had the world's most powerful moustache, with each contender's devotion inspiring more future mustachioed warriors to contribute their grooming secrets. As the night drew to its chaotic closure, clouds of sweet and unpleasant smells mingled together under the light of the stars. Couples shared guilty glances, promising to recreate tonight's debacles in more private settings, while friends high-fived with brimming excitement over newfound bravado, every topic of conversation superseded by one clear universal consensus. We don't need clocks or schedules when chaos, camaraderie and shared hilarity rule the day. So there you have it. Communal days in a time without clocks were less about the precise timing and more about the delightful embrace of unpredictability. A collage of moments bound together by laughter, friendships, and a splash of anarchy. You wouldn't trade these chaotic gatherings for anything because they defined not just a day, but a lifetime of stories worth telling, not through a clock, but through memories that made the villagers' hearts race faster than the flyaway goat. Love letters, lost to time, uncertain deliveries. Expect a letter in 2 weeks. More than likely, sending your heartfelt messages through a courier ended with, "See you eventually." Find some time to reflect on love letters lost somewhere between realms. Never a good indication of consistency. In an age marked by a profound lack of punctuality, love letters became the ultimate exercise in patience and uncertainty. Much like waiting for the buried treasure to surface in a pirate movie, everything depends on the luck of the weather and the carrier's choice of snack break. Imagine, if you will, that you're deeply infatuated with a local lass whose smile could light 1,000 dark, hay-strewn markets. You decide to write her a letter so heartfelt it would make a bard weep. A true masterpiece filled with metaphors about sunsets, butterflies, and maybe, just maybe, an awkward turtle or two. You pour your soul into each stroke of the quill, only to drop it into the hands of Thomas, the local courier. This guy is less of a speed demon and more of a leisurely turtle making his way across a mud-soaked field. Why hurry? He's got all day, and those fast-moving goats aren't going to chase themselves. In the best-case scenario, you carefully fold the letter, hopeful and giddy, while Thomas swears he'll deliver it straight to her door, mostly because the only other option is to nap for an hour in a nearby haystack. You can practically feel the romance simmering in the air, but 2 weeks and 3 moon cycles later, you find yourself pacing near the one tiny window in your hovel, filled with nervous excitement. What's taking so long? Did he stop to chat with some chickens about weather patterns? Did he enroll in a philosophy class taught by an owl? The not-so-subtle shade of anxiety begins to creep in. Now, let's paint this picture a little darker. What if Thomas decided to take a detour? A quick jaunt through a neighbouring village where the tavern's ale flows like water. He lingers too long, raising a mug as if it's a trophy for a battle well fought. Time floats away like autumn leaves on a breeze, and suddenly your heartfelt letter might be competing with spontaneous games of dice and the occasional goat race. So your love's delightful response, "I will love you until the sun burns out," becomes more like, "I've moved on because I only planned for 2 weeks of waiting, not 2 months." The ensuing chaos of miscommunication morphs this earnest love letter into a vague rumour. Did you hear? Toby sent a letter. Excitement bubbles, but what might Toby be saying? Is it a confession of passion or merely a request for more chicken stew? Who knows? The envelope soaked in the village well's water could tell tales of its own, if only it could speak. Between this previously monogamous relationship and the impending arrival of summer's broiling heat, your love life becomes a giant game of romantic roulette, except with a rusty wheel and only one ball bearing that never finds its way home, and let's not even get into the physics of the journey. Waiting for a reply felt like being trapped in an eternal loop of waiting for bread to rise. painfully slow and full of dramatic flourishes. Every time you heard hooves clattering down the muddy path, your heart would leap in your chest, only to plummet like a poorly baked loaf as it turned out to be someone else's goat, bleating in rhythmic disappointment. Who knew goats would become the unexpected rule of your love life? In hopes of resolving this ordeal, you might consider a second letter, a risky move fraught with peril. Can the same courier be trusted again? Or will Thomas's compatriots laugh you out of the market like a sad, forlorn bard? 100 uncertain options stretch out before you. Should you write it again? Maybe break into song to attract better luck? Or craft a cleverly ironic message that bewildered middle-aged folks will discuss for generations? Ultimately, life without synchronized timepieces taught your ancestors that true love might be about more than just passion. It's about the willingness to endure a masterclass in anxiety over ambiguous delivery schedules. And while you may not have the luxury of texts and emails, those beautifully crafted letters serve as time capsules of your heart, a blend of desperation, humour, and the timeless hope that love, even one lost in time, can find its way back home. As you ponder the whimsical world of letter writing, remember, every delay was a chance to dream, and as inconvenient as it sounds, love thrives on uncertainty, like an awkward turtle trying to traverse a bustling marketplace on a foggy day. Sure, it might take you longer than expected, but oh, the legendary tales you'll have to tell. Kings started their schedules without much regard for citizens' time. Unless it was your head on the block, that timing had all the grace of an overzealous arts festival gone wrong. Wishing you a nice day, might be on your way to the gallows depending on mood swings. Imagine waking up in the royal palace, the grand noise of trumpets blaring to announce the dawn. Completely unhelpful, especially when your responsibilities depend on the royal whim of a lord who has just woken up cranky. The sun might be high in the sky, but no one can dare suggest that to King Hugo Thend, who thinks morning means sometime before sunset. Let's talk about morning routines. In the Grand Castle, breakfast could border on a theatrical performance more than a meal. You've got the kitchen staff yelling orders, the court jesters performing overcooked jokes, and the royal chef insisting the king's eggs must be precisely the size of a goose's, laid only under a full moon, or something equally ridiculous. If you manage to snag a spot at the breakfast table, congratulations! You're part of an elite crew serving the king his morning gruel, which most assuredly isn't topped with avocado toast. Those were still 1,000 years away. But don't forget the courtly time concept. The day's schedule inflated like a hot air balloon, filled with noble visitations, tedious discussions about taxes, and planning extravagant jousting tournaments. And who gets the luck of the draw to fill the king's calendar? The royal planner, aka the poor soul who takes naps under the table. This person has mastered the art of listening while dreaming of escaping to the countryside, away from the king's impossible demands. Want to schedule a mid-morning snack? You might as well book a lunar eclipse, since it shines as brightly as your chances of securing that time slot amidst the king's busy schedule of sword fights and fancy hat showcases. As the hours ticked, ostensibly no quicker than molasses on a winter day, the king might choose to take a leisurely stroll through the gardens, shouting, "Let them eat cake," in a fit of joy, or accidentally misplace his temper, unleashing an edict that leaves poor Richard, the peasant, banned from using the letter E for a fortnight. Don't underestimate the absurdity of royal decrees. Citizens would roll their eyes, scramble to comply, and quietly mutter their own bulletins as they navigated a time warped by a monarchy, more focused on appearances than practicality. Ah, council meetings. If you thought watching paint dry was thrilling, try sitting in on a royal council meeting. You'd think the kingdom was being attacked by armies of angry bees, judging by how slow proceedings moved. So, we'll discuss the land tax by firelight next week. Maybe. Unless we can all agree on what time next week means. Meanwhile, the court swordsmen practice acrobatics, and the accountants break their pencils over complex calculations while dreaming of freedom. Even the concept of formalities was a game of chance. Try showing up to present a proposal when the king decides he's suddenly taken a shine to mermaids. We cannot tie the king down when he's seeking a legendary creature, grumbled the advisor. But can we propose this meeting again next fortnight? But only if the moon is in alignment, and when everything finally came together. Yes, life struck back. Plan a banquet and the royal pet dragon might decide to roast the beef instead of cooking it in the oven. Hungry peasants might as well just gather outside with sticks and stones in the hopes of roasting whatever was left behind. No good feast for you if King Hugo II gets distracted by some court romance over in the corner. All bets were off as time seemed to float away like one of the king's foolish dreams. At the end of the day, time felt less like the linear concept we understand today, and more like this chaotic dance of whims, subject to the poetry of those with crowns. Chronology? Who cares when you've got an unhinged king, a gourmet mess in the kitchen, and an entire populace just attempting to survive another silly decree about hats? The pendulum swings either way, and all you could hope for was that maybe, just maybe, you'd get a decent slice of good timing instead of the grief of a poorly executed plan. In this delightful game of royal neglect, citizens learned one golden truth. It was always best to manage your own time, because for all its regal chaos, it never quite managed to suit the needs of ordinary lives. Time could be an art form, woven away into the fabric of everyday existence, while the crown fumbled its performance. Children back then entertained themselves with nothing more than imagination and a pile of rocks, literally crafting games of hours by making up the rules as the stars played hide and seek. How long did they play? Until we could hear the wardens and were sent home, of course. Time was a vague concept, like that mysterious relative you hear stories about but never meet. The sun slowly traversed the sky, casting elongated shadows that inspired wild, creative guesses. It's either almost midday or just past don't get caught playing in the street o'clock. You might associate it with lunch, though lunch had its own secrets. Do you know how hard it is to negotiate with a stubborn goat who believes it's dinner time too? Imagine this. A group of toddlers pitted against each other in an ambitious attempt to determine the neighbourhood champion of hide the oddly shaped vegetable. When you had no concept of time, creative improvisation was the name of the game. You could be running for 45 minutes or until your legs finally decided that enough was enough. Forging your own rules for games became less about squaring up time cards and more about avoiding the horrified stare of an adult witnessing a near tragedy involving an unwanted neighbour's chicken. But these games of hours weren't just reckless abandon. Oh no, for you see, they often had rules that made as much sense as trying to bake bread in a mud pit. You'd gather everyone and solemnly declare so-and-so is the judge. Anyone who catches a cow gets to be the kings of the 5 hills. What did that even mean? Why, it had the same weight as whoever finds the largest snail gets a party, which, trust me, no one actually wanted. In a world governed by the sun's whims, those children quickly learned time management, except theirs had no rules of the clock. All they had was imagination sprawling out like the sky above, ripe with possibilities and far more reliable than attempts made by all those stuffy timekeeping devices tumbling about in the nobles' dungeons. As the sun dipped low, signalling the end of playtime, kids scuttled home like mice, hoping to avoid parental confrontation over scraped knees and misplaced rocks. Hours of entertainment thwarted by the need for cleanliness. As the weeks turned to seasons, these games evolved They became folklore spoken around campfires, enticing tales of heroic fetch quests and grand battles against wild beasts that started out as fluffy kittens. Every child knew some variation of the epic quest to chase down the mysterious rooster. Did Peter catch the elusive bird? Who knows? One thing we do know was that The Age of the Chicken was never meant to be a documentary. Generally, these games bred a buzzing camaraderie among children from different backgrounds, as rules shifted with childlike spontaneity, much like the sandy remnants of a forgotten hourglass tumbling at the beach. Every once in a while, Morley, the village's grumpy old man, would tumble out of frustration with the latest game involving his prized radishes. "You're not playing with my vegetables today. Go play with the crows instead." And the clever youngsters would adopt the persona of brave adventurers, valiantly battling imagined foes with pitchforks drawn until they heard their own mothers call out at sunset, just in case they forgot which way home was. As twilight descended, marking the official end of play, siblings would convene on porches, recounting tales about action-packed afternoons under the heat of the sun. Imagination soared higher than any clock could measure, fueled by the glowing embers of shared experiences rather than markers of long-forgotten minutes. Perhaps that was the secret. A life lived on a timeline of whimsy has immeasurable value in sparking creativity. A real definition of hours of fun that no one could write down anywhere. So next time you pull out your smartwatch to combat boredom, try channeling those rascally children from the past. Find a pile of rocks, and perhaps, just perhaps, you will find history surrounding you like an unseen playground waiting to be played. A game of hours that emphasises pure, unfettered creativity over the constraints of time. After all, isn't life more fun when measured in giggles than clocks? Finally, those outdated sand timers might teach lessons on modern struggles of time. Because nothing says chaos like watching sand dribble down through a small hole while you race to catch every second. It's like a cinematic drama, but you can't rewind. This little device, crafted from glass, wood and sand, is as close as you'll get to a timepiece, but not exactly foolproof. Imagine you're a medieval peasant, tasked with determining when to begin your harvest or stop for lunch based on a natural timer more unreliable than your town's gossip mill. As you stand there, anxiously glancing at that hourglass, trying to remember all the things that can distract you during the next 30 minutes, you can almost hear the clock running out in your head. You can almost feel the weight of your life choices weighing on you, especially when time is always in short supply, unlike the stale bread crust you've had to chew on all week. If only that sand could tell you whether you should finish up at the field before your neighbour's prized chicken distracts you with its suspicious clucking, or if you still have time to avoid engaging in an awkward chat with the village druid about the latest herbal remedies, and then, triumphantly ignoring the gravity of your choices, you let the sand timer do its thing. But wait, what's this? A neighbour suddenly shows up claiming to have an important message about the upcoming festival, and just like that, time has escaped you faster than a plump hen in search of its next worm. There you stand, heart racing, sand slipping through the hourglass, the door creaking open, and now you can't remember if you wanted the second helping of stew or to save that for later. You might even find yourself contemplating the broader implications of your time management practices, while clenching that hourglass. This isn't just about sand, it's about life. As you watch that grainy frenemy fall, a wave of existential dread washes over you. What if you wake up tomorrow and the entire village has moved on without you? Should you send a letter via carrier pigeon? Or wait, what letter? You forgot to send the last one. You know, the one that told your cousin you finally found a goat that doesn't spontaneously explode at awkward moments. And just when you think you're on solid ground, that same sand timer decides to tease you by suddenly appearing empty. It's like the universe playing tricks on you. You reach for it with a bedraggled sigh, only to realise it's the same hourglass that's probably been around longer than your great-grandfather. Weren't you just cursing it for being as fickle as fortune? Well, that ancient relic managed to reject your requests with the enthusiasm of a disinterested piglet keeping you company as you plough. Now let's pause for some serious contemplation. You know how in life, time feels like a tidal wave, washing over you and sweeping away every intention you had for the day? Well, imagine trying to navigate that without a firm grasp on how much is slipping through your fingers. Would a simple hourglass work better than marking time between your vastly irrelevant chores? Will you manage to catch the last grains of every moment while planning ahead to avoid missing out on village karaoke night? Ultimately, it's a cruel twist of fate that our forebears used such primitive tools to measure life's fast-paced moments. Just imagine trying to keep track of social engagements, or spotting the perfect time to grab an apple off the market table as a pig squeals at your feet. No calendars, no sticky notes, just pure existential chaos wrapped up in that little frame of sand. It feels like a slap in the face every time you realise that time won't wait for anyone, unless, of course, you're a goat. So the next time you glance at your phone, pausing to consider how fortunate you are now, at least until you remember yourself waiting by an hourglass staring into your future, like a hopeful contortionist at a circus performance. In the end, it's a wonder how much time was lost, thanks to that tiny fragmented enemy and the ever-pressing demands of life. The hourglass, although a noble warrior of time, left you with more to ponder than to celebrate, and perhaps a squirrel outside reminds you that time might not just exist in a vacuum of grainy inevitability, it might just be the intoxicating chaos of human experience.